I've read about 70 or so pages of healing developmental trauma today, and this is a really valuable book. There's just so many good insights about how to heal yourself and others. Um, One of the things was about empathy and kind of the difference between like authentic empathy and I forget, I can't remember the term right now, but like compulsive empathy essentially, to where like you're letting people overstep your boundaries. You're kind of like forming an unhealthy enmeshment and reinforcing the child consciousness in the client or in the person that you're coaching. I can see that to where like as an empathetic person myself, like it's easy to overextend yourself and like really if somebody's not doing well or is going through a difficult time, like that can have a big toll on you. But as a coach or a therapist, your purpose is to just facilitate that healing process and just this also these last 70 pages talked a lot about just presence, just being there with the person, the whole book actually, just kind of letting the process unfold, being okay if you don't know the exact right thing to say, the exact thing to do next. Like it's much better to just be present with a person than to, oh, let's do this exercise because I don't know what else to do. Let's keep the conversation going. Like it's okay to just like be there in silence or, to take the time for the person to feel things and stuff like that. And the last part I just read about was about integration. Ironically, with this challenge, was about integration and like taking the time to allow all the things you're feeling, the progress you just made, the things you just learned, like taking the time to allow that to integrate into your system. And that's where like sometimes it's just better to sit in silence to just kind of let that let that atmosphere just kind of sit in that, settle in the new realization, just breathe, relax. And I think that's something I can take forward. And actually, with the relationship that just ended after about probably like 7 months or so of dating, that's been really difficult. And it's been important for me to give myself the time. That's why I didn't read anything yesterday. Like to just give myself, I mean, as you would expect, like, I read like 20, 25 pages, but um, like to just really reflect on what are the lessons I learned, what can I take forward from this, what could I have done better, or what, like, can I do better going into the future? And that was something that I feel like in my previous relationship before this one, when that ended, I don't think I took the amount of time to do that I needed or put enough intention into that process. And due to that, a lot of the same patterns repeated in this current relationship. And then not taking the time to integrate, like, that was something she mentioned to me of like why she felt that things kind of fell apart was because I was doing, I'm in a program called the Self Integration School. That's where some of these books came from: Healing Developmental Trauma, these three, Musing Ourselves to Death, Intellect to Intuition, Healing Developmental Trauma. They came from that course, as well as a lot of the other books that I sometimes bring out on this channel. Some of them are not from that, but a lot of them are, as I'm going through that course. And I think it's really important. Like I have a little more capacity than she did, so she kind of felt she had to keep up with me, and that became really overwhelming. We were reading a lot of stuff about relationships, but also about trauma and like having the conversations, and it just became all too much. Even for me, like some of this stuff is really overwhelming sometimes, and sometimes I feel bad if I take some time off of reading or like feel like, what, I need to finish all the books in these course and I need to keep going, but like what's the point of all this if I'm not really like, and I think I've been doing a pretty good job of it overall, but I'm kind of just learning a lot about my pace of like I really need to like take the time to integrate this even more so than like trying to get through all the books. Like what's important is that I integrate this material and grow from it. But at the same time, like I think this challenge has taught me a lot to where like If it's just that I'm feeling lazy and I don't want to read, like I can push through that and, read for like 90 minutes to 2 hours a day. I think I can definitely do that like almost every day, regardless of how I'm feeling. And that'll be a pace that I'm comfortable with that's not going to overload my system. And in that spirit of just integrating the material, like I have a lot of emotions going through me right now. And after reading all of this, trying to integrate it as well as the lessons from this relationship, like I don't think it makes sense to continue and force myself to read the last like 100 pages of this book. I think I'm just going to take that lesson and end it here. And, I read these 4 books in 4 days. I think that's a worthy accomplishment. And I think I got and learned what I wanted to out of this experience. And I hope if you've made it to this point in the video that you've gotten something valuable out of this and maybe inspired yourself to, challenge yourself for a week to, even if you don't go as crazy as I am, like, okay, like I'm gonna challenge myself for a week to do this one activity I've been wanting to do for 1 hour a day. If you can take some inspiration and do something like that, awesome. If you enjoyed the video, that's great. Help me out. I mean, hey, if you made it this far, leave a like and subscribe. I'm sure you enjoyed the video if you made it to this point, so help the kid out. But actually what I'm going to do, I decided, is finish the video off just by reading a couple chapters from this book here, The New Path. This was one of Yogananda's closest disciples, Swami Kriyanada, who wrote this book, and it was just all about his life with the master Paramahansa Yogananda. And yeah, it's been a couple weeks since I read this. I'm about halfway through it as well, but it's just an incredibly inspiring and uplifting and insightful book as Kriyananda explains his journey. So I'm gonna just read a couple of chapters of this to end off the video because that's what I want to do, and then I'll talk about what I learned to end this video on a joyful note and send you on your way. So I'll see you there. I just read one chapter of this book, The New Path, and just about 10 pages or so, but it was a very inspiring chapter, and I already feel a lot of upliftment just from reading this. And this chapter in specific had to do with miracles that occurred in sparing the lives of Yogananda's disciples. I'll give you a couple examples, like this first one here, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about. Norman, who was one of the disciples living at the Mother Center in Los Angeles on Mount Washington. Norman entered the dining room one day at lunchtime looking stunned. This morning, he announced shakily, I was driving the big flatbed truck down Mount Washington. As I came to the steepest part of the hill, I stepped on the brake to slow down for the hairpin turn at the bottom, but my foot went right to the floor. I pumped frantically. Nothing happened. By this time, the truck was going so fast I couldn't shift into lower gear. In moments, I knew I'd be hurling down to my death at the end of that steep embankment. Desperately, I prayed to Master. The disciples would call Yogananda Master because he was a master of consciousness. He had mastered the human form and was kind of living beyond that. Or he was living beyond that. But, Okay, anyways, is this what you want? I prayed to Master, is this what you want? Suddenly, the truck slowed to a complete stop. The brakes still weren't working, but I was able to park safely in gear and curb the front wheel. What a blessing, Norman concluded, to have a God-realized master for a guru. As disciples of a great yogi, we often found that we had only to call Master mentally for misfortune to be speedily averted. And I certainly feel that blessing as well to be a disciple of this great master and feel, his presence in meditation and feel his guidance in my life. And it is reassuring to know that, I can kind of feel that I'm protected and I'm well guided, even when things feel like they're falling apart. Like there's another part of this chapter which talks about how the master will test his disciples, because to overcome, when you're on a spiritual path, your ultimate goal is to overcome attachment to delusion, which includes all the material things of this world. So there's going to be a lot of tests, and it's not always going to be the most comfortable experience to go through that. But in the end, it's your biggest blessing, because you're just going to be so much more joyful and in the light of God when you're over to push through those delusions. And let's get one more story here. This was, all right, this is a good one. This wasn't the one all right, I'll read this one. Give me 1 second here to find the beginning. All right, so there was a couple of disciples, just paraphrasing this first part, that were doing some construction on plastering the Lotus Tower that forms the archway entrance to the SRF church grounds in Hollywood. And then on one climb, as he reached up to grasp the top rung, he missed it. The heavy hod of plaster on his shoulder began pulling him backward. Now he was unable to grasp the rung with either hand. A 20-foot drop, with all that weight on his shoulder, might very well have killed him. Realizing that it was too late to save himself, Joe thought urgently of Master and chanted out loud, "Om." Both men later testified as to what happened next. As Joe was chanting, some invisible force pushed him slowly back upright. A moment later, when he was able to grasp the rung again. Gasping with relief, he completed his climb. Andy Anderson, the foreman on this job, was a professional carpenter and builder who had been hired from outside to oversee our work. He knew nothing of our philosophy and often chuckled at the thought of working with all these yogis. But there was no doubt in his voice when he told me of how he had witnessed an uncanny instance of protection. Why you guys don't all get killed on this job beats me. You just aren't careful enough. I was standing right over there one day when someone on a scaffold dropped a long 2x4 without even looking below him. Another of you yogis was standing underneath, for all I could tell, not even minding his own business. The 2x4 struck the ground at such an angle that it couldn't possibly have missed him in falling over. It might have killed him. "Look out," I hollered. Just then, that 2x4, leaning in his direction, mind you, stood back upright and, so help me, fell over in the opposite direction. I know I wasn't just seeing things. Andy ended up becoming a lay disciple himself. Yeah, so I mean, these are the miracles that can happen. It's just a good reminder. I've experienced all the spiritual blessings and feeling that protection, but it's good to, obviously this isn't going to apply probably to the people watching this video, and you may not even believe that these events took place, which is understandable. But I've experienced enough of this master's presence and blessings to know that this is all absolutely true. And everything, all the events recounted in the autobiography of a yogi as well. Master's account of his life written by himself, obviously an autobiography. Everything that happened in there was absolutely true. It's not just like allegory or anything like that. And this is kind of considered like a good sequel to the autobiography by some, because it was written by one of his closest disciples and kind of illustrates just how great the Master's presence actually was, because he also kind of portrayed himself humbly as if he was going to these saints for their blessings and guidance. But, he told his disciple Kriyanada, I believe it was Kriyanada that he told this, that I went to all these saints seeking advice, but they ended up seeking advice from me, even in his younger years, because that's how great he was. He was born as a self-realized master. Even as a baby, he was fully conscious of his body and everything that was going on, right? So what a blessing it is to, to learn from the teachings of this master and be on this path. And, if you have any desire to learn some of what I've learned, first of all, check out Yogananda's work, check out the autobiography in this very good book right here. But also, if you feel called to, check out the pinned comments where I explain the details of what the Oasis group that I've started entails, where I'll be leading everybody in meditation weekly, doing some Bible study from Yogananda's interpretation, which adds a much more profound layer to the Bible, as well as some other exercises here and there, and satsang as well, where we just discuss spiritual truth. So I'd love to have you there. You can also book a free 30-minute call with me in the description. But yeah, oh yeah. And then one last thing was, he mentioned also in this chapter what he's experienced when he's seen disciples of Yogananda experience death and having to leave their body. And he basically just explains that whenever he's seen it from a disciple, they're just always very joyful. A member of our Hollywood church congregation died of a stroke. His wife later told me, in his final moments, my husband whispered to me lovingly, "Don't feel badly, dear. I'm so happy, and I see a bright, bright light all around me." Disciples who have died of cancer or other painful diseases have left their bodies peacefully with a smile on their lips. Actually, I'm gonna read this paragraph here, kind of like explaining all that as well, because it's a better explanation than I could put in my own words. People often point to the sufferings of humanity as proof either that God doesn't exist or that he doesn't care for his human children. Paramahansa Yogananda's answer to that charge was that people don't care enough about God to tune into his help. Indeed, by their indifference, they create the very problems which later they lay accusingly at his door. If in daylight a person moves about a room with eyes closed, he may bump against a piece of furniture and hurt himself. By closing one's eyes to light, one creates his own darkness. By closing one's heart to love, one creates his own fear, hatred, or apathy. By closing one's soul to joy, one creates his own misery. And, isn't it amazing how often we do that to ourselves when God and great masters such as Yogananda are right there willing to help people that are willing to come in tune with him. But yeah, I didn't really expect to end this video off with this, but it just felt right to do so. And I'm glad we could end this off on a joyful note. Again, I'll be writing about my experience with this challenge on my Substack, so subscribe to that if you're interested, and blessings be upon you. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this video, and I'll see you soon on the next one.